The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight, those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. Tonight, if you do have questions, you can private chat them to either H. Foister or Ceiling Cat, and we will get those answered for you. We have a good show tonight, and tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Good evening, everyone.
And we have Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And if you are somewhere else in the world and you don't want to come to the Para-X chat room, you can send us email to the paranormalview@gmail.com, and we will get those questions answered. If you'd like to come over to the chat room, you can come to the paraxradionetwork.com and just follow the entrance, and you will be right in the chat room with all these wonderful people. So with that, we have a good show, and we got a lot to talk about. So Jeff, why don't you introduce our guest?
Absolutely. Well, tonight our guest is Keven McQueen. He's a author, and hang on, my bio thing. He's born in Richmond, Kentucky. He's the instructor in the Department of English and Theater at Easterm Kentucky University, and the author of several books covering such topics as history, biography, historical, true ghostlore. So welcome, Keven McQueen.
Hello, thank you. I'm glad to be back.
All right. And this book here that you have, because we've had you on the show quite a few times, and this book goes through 14 states in the West, except California, because that state is a book by itself.
That's true. It's a book called Creepy California that came out about 3 years ago.
And we had John for that one.
Yes.
So, Barbara, you got anything you want to start off with, or a particular one?
Well, kind of.
Okay.
And only because it made me laugh when I first looked at the title, and it's because I'm a big fan of the Great Bugs Bunny, and his wonderful line about making he should have turned left at Albuquerque. And of course, one of the first stories that I narrowed in on was taking the wrong turn at Albuquerque.
Right, that's a Bugs Bunny reference, all right.
And it's indicative of the whole book of it's not irreverence for what happened in these events, but rather a really wonderful exercise, I guess, armchair research, in that you're able to sit back and sometimes laugh at some of these stories.
Thank you. Even some of the rather horrifying ones, if you go about it the right way, they can be scary and kind of funny too.
Well, there's always twists and turns, I guess, in every event, and I guess at some point you have to start looking at this from a standpoint of, well, we knew that was going to happen.
Yeah. Some things are just so predictable and some things aren't.
So do you ever come across these stories and, you start reading them and go, oh, I know where this is going?
Pretty often. I find that it's a good idea to, once you have all the story dates from newspapers, print them out and read them. because you don't want to start off a story that sounds like it's going to be really good and you've done all this work writing it, and then suddenly you find out there's a big anticlimax to it. And if you read them, it's almost sometimes like a novel, because real life takes all these really weird twists and turns that you're not expecting.
Well, and even in this story, I mean, it starts off as, you know, this guy, may have killed his wife, and then you find out, oh, he's killed multiple ones. It's kind of...
and
go ahead.
after insuring them all heavily and taking less and less time, I can't remember all the details now, but I think he kept his first wife a few months and his second one only a few weeks, and the third one, the one he got arrested for, he'd only been married to her a day or two. So he just got greedy and too confident, I guess.
And it almost makes you wonder, if Albert Hitchcock had gotten a hold of some of these stories.
Oh, some of them would make really good Hitchcocks.
Oh, yeah. He'd had a field day.
Oh,
You wonder why they didn't do some research into things like that and come up with some good stories.
well, I know that The Birds was based on a true story. And I think Double Indemnity may very well have been too.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, this story, the Take a Wrong Turn at Albuquerque, would have made such a wonderful Hitchcock story. Or a good film noir. Easily.
Really, isn't it? It does kind of seem that way. Even Psycho was sort of kind of based on a true story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Ed Gein, yay.
Yeah.
But,
Well, I say yay because I was friends with the author of the original novel on which the movie was based.
but it does, a lot of these stories do take a very tragic, pathetic end in it, and almost a film noir quality, because they're going to get caught. They've had all the, as I was saying before we went on the air, there seems to be a common thread of bad decisions and stupidity on a lot of people's parts when it comes to these stories.
That's true. Bad decisions all the way around.
You had
First being trying to do it in the first place. Early successes only make you too confident. And then you start making big mistakes. And the bigger mistakes you make, although it's tragic, it actually takes on a sort of a dark comedy kind of edge to it.
Well, I liked, there was one you had in there. It's under your Montana one. It was on page 90, and it was called Ben's Premonition. And he was actually from Kentucky, and the story starts out, he's stationed in Louisiana, I believe it is.
Yeah, that story actually means a lot to me because that's the county where I live, Madison County. And the folks who work, I teach at EKU, Easterm Kentucky University, and the folks who work in the archives there showed me his letter. So I've actually seen this letter, or letters, I should say. It's 2 or 3 of them.
Won't you tell him the story about that?
Well, the basic story is it was 1876, and it was a soldier named Private Ben Rogers. He was stationed in Louisiana, and anyone who's a history buff is going to instantly know the direction this is heading. Stationed with the 7th Cavalry. And so he wrote a letter to his cousin in Madison County saying, well, I'm paraphrasing here, it looks like I'm going to be shipped out west to fight Indians, and I really don't want to go. I'll do my duty, but, I've got a bad feeling about this. And then the letter ended abruptly, and then in different handwriting, another relative wrote a note to the cousin saying, poor Ben, it looks like his premonition came true because he was one of the people killed at Little Bighorn.
Wow. How did they get the letter?
Well, it was just evidently I'm not sure how it eventually it got to the relative it was intended to go to. Who got it before that, I'm not sure, but it must have been another relative because he wrote on it Actually, I can find it. I have the book right here. He wrote on it, Jim, this letter came for you, as you see, a year ago, but Tom kept it in his pocket until now, and I now send it to you. Poor Ben. He seemed to have a premonition of his doom.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not sure who Tom is, but evidently the letter went to Tom, and then eventually it was sent on to Ben's cousin in Madison County.
So I assume that they, after the Little Bighorn incident, somebody went through pockets to discover who they were and grab letters.
Yeah, since it was an unfinished letter, I'm pretty sure that's what happened. They just found the letter in his rucksack or something.
Wow.
His pocket, maybe.
Well, the irony.
Yeah, they got called, okay, everybody at attention. He's like, I'll get back to this. And just didn't have a chance to finish it.
Well,
yeah, that's very likely.
The irony was he only had 2 months before he was mustered out of service.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
There he is in the letter saying, I wish I could stay in Louisiana. I don't want to go out west.
And I think it also said that he died on the Last Stand Hill with Custer.
I think he was with Reno, but Reno and Custer it was all part of one great big movement between the two companies.
Right.
But although he was serving under Custer on that particular day, he was under Reno.
Well, Reno got wiped out too because he was separated from
Yeah.
Custer. Yeah. That was just a shame. They probably still would have ended up losing even if they were together, but they might have stood a little bit better chance.
Right, if they hadn't separated.
Yeah, yeah. So I thought that was a real interesting story because it was from your area and it was like you knew the people kind of almost.
And it's also a major historical event. Most of what I write about doesn't concern major events in history, but that one actually did. And
you find a lot where, just like in the first one from Texas on page 9 that I've got, it was from John B. Millicott, and he killed his daughter and her boyfriend. In 1896.
Oh, excuse me. There goes the phone.
and
see, I brought my phone down here just in case.
Oh.
Skype went out, but I didn't know it was about to ring, so I thought I had it on mute. Sorry about that.
No problem. Well, there's a lot of them where people are killing their wives and daughters or daughters and boyfriends, and you wonder what kind of duress or what was going on when something like that took place.
Yeah, that's one of those cases where you don't get the full story because no one knows the full story, and you'll always wonder about it. What did he have against this boyfriend so very badly? And then to cap it all, he blew himself up with a can of gunpowder,
right,
or exploding powder from a mine. So. Right.
Yeah, after he killed him, he went out and set on a can, I believe it was, or something with gunpowder, dynamite or something.
Dynamite, it was dynamite.
And blew himself up. And they said there wasn't much left.
I think their words were not enough to fill a cigar box.
That was it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was something going on there.
So I thought that was pretty interesting. Barbara?
So when you write these stories, do you put them in, I assume that you put them in historical context so that if there is situations of duress like the Great Depression or the stock market or the Oklahoma Dust Bowl, that you can put context to it to see what the lifestyle and the atmosphere was like at that point?
I do if it seems like it's necessary to the story. Sometimes it isn't, but sometimes it really does help to know more about national events at the time, the national mood. So, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Would you find that that certain circumstances, there's going to be a lot more death, a lot more killings, just simply due to the stress people were under?
I think probably so. The Great Depression being a perfect example.
In terms of suicides or in terms of murder?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Suicides for people who are too depressed really to go on, and an increase in crime, and people who are just looking for a way to make an easy living during times when employment's bad.
And I assume that would also be the case of people bilking people out of money and, robberies and murder to that effect.
Bank robberies, just plain old muggings, just cheating.
And I like this one here on page 10 that you had. It was about a missionary, Philip B., on May 10th, 1903, in Fagan, Texas. He wore a top hat into town.
And got killed for it.
Won't you tell a story on that one?
I suspect there was more to it than that, but the excuse was they didn't like his hat. He rode into town on a mule carrying a lot of Bibles, and he started preaching at the local miners and cowboys, probably insulting them would be a better term for it.
Oops.
And then he went back to his hotel, and of course hotels had bars at the time, and he went to get a drink before he turned in, and he asked for a glass of lemonade. That was a mistake. Everyone started making fun of him, and he got mad, and they yanked his hat off with a rope, and then everyone hit him at once, and he died the next day of his injuries. And then they just dragged him off to the outskirts of town and buried him in an unmarked grave.
Yeah. The top hat was his undoing.
The top hat and the lemonade. There's a moral there, I'm sure.
So when you go to reading these, what is like one of your favorites that was in the book?
One of my favorites in the book is the chapter about the woman, Lida Southard, a perfect example of the Black Widow who just marries one man after another and poisons them and takes their insurance money. And again, just as we mentioned before, finally gets a little too ambitious and gets caught. And I don't know why, but for some reason that strikes me as a perfect example of murder as dark comedy. Just to see the sheer number of times she got married and how you would think would never get away with it, but she did over and over and over.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those, you're right, Black Widow or arsenic and old lace type of situations where people just don't suspect some people.
Well, it helps to be young and pretty.
Yeah.
Which she was, and evidently that's one reason she got away with it for so long. She fled off to Hawaii, and they caught her and brought her back. She went on trial, and she had of course, she was treated with great deference because she was young, pretty, and female, and she could go out on the town, and after she was arrested and put in prison, I should add. So she got to go out town, and it was amazing she didn't run away. In fact, once she did run away, she escaped, and then they caught her again later.
Did they just not assume that she was going to be found guilty?
Well, this was even after she was found guilty.
Oh.
She went to jail, and the warden still kept letting her out. Even though she'd murdered, I'm trying to remember how many people, something like 6 men and a child, I think.
Wow.
Then when she broke out of jail, she got married again and tried to talk her new husband into getting insurance. But she was caught before she could do anything with him. And she died free. She served a very small number of years, relatively speaking, and she lived free, died free, with about 6 or 7 different last names because she was married so much. Like I say, it's one of those things that you'd think it wouldn't be funny, but the longer it goes on and the stranger it gets, the more amusing it becomes in a sort of twisted way.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not Peckinpah and it's not Hitchcock. This one's more Billy Wilder.
Yeah, that sounds like Billy Wilder, or even John Waters.
That's true.
So maybe.
But
The
there's
Coen brothers. That's who should do it. The
The Coen-
Coen
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
would
Need
be
a wood
perfect
chopper for that.
them.
And then we'd be sure to get Billy Bob Thornton in there. And...
It's just amazing that, and you wonder what the mindset behind the warden, the jailer, the people of the town that she was convicted in that would allow such behavior. And I guess it goes back to the social mores of women don't belong in prison.
That's the only thing I can come up with. There's really no logical reason to let her walk out of jail and go to the movies, as long as she promises to come back at the end of the day. I can think of no other reason.
Yeah. Or, I don't know what kind of jail that they had there, or maybe they simply just did not have the facilities to treat female prisoners.
That's possible too.
Yeah, a lot of those jails wasn't fit for anything to start with.
True.
Yeah.
And probably not very big either. I'm not assuming when some of them might have had maybe 4 or 5 cells to them. So
That's probably true. It wasn't a really large town.
Right.
wow.
And usually if there's a bar in town, a lot of people, drunks, was arrested and locked up, so there couldn't have been much room.
Yeah. But that goes back to the whole historical backdrop of some of these stories is interesting as to what was going on in the town, how big it was, what kind of facilities that they had that allowed this sort of behavior to happen, or even the fact that they could get away with it, just that there wasn't an Interpol, so to speak, where they could watch out for people like traveling from town to town.
In almost any story, there are some unanswered questions that you'll always wonder about. So that's one of them, is why does she get such deferential treatment?
Yeah.
That's, that's like the one on page 13 called Advance Notice with Maud C., July of 1879. I thought that was a pretty interesting story.
Yeah, that's another one that you wouldn't call it a big event in history, but it's just a creepy little story. She was just visiting Victoria, Texas, where she wasn't even really from there. She was simply visiting relatives, and she kept singing that old folk song, "See That My Grave Is Kept Clean." I'm sure everyone knows it.
Oh, yeah. No, not so much.
I would sing it for you, but you don't really want that, believe me.
So then,
Everyone was wondering, why is she singing that song? And then she shot herself, and they figured out why.
yeah, she did all that and then committed suicide. And she was
Yeah, of
young.
course.
She wasn't old. She was young, right?
Yeah, she was only, what was she? I don't know that it gave her exact name, but she was quite young. Oh, she was 19, so very young.
And you wonder what prompts people like that, what was wrong or what was going on in their life
Right,
at such
no
a young age.
explanation.
Yeah, to want to commit suicide.
No explanation at all.
But you have a few stories like that in the book where they do things and then kill herself.
That's true. That's one where, it's just a creepy tale. There's no way to make anything amusing out of it, but it's just a mix between amusing and creepy stories. That's one of the creepy ones.
Well, it's sort of like way to end an act on a high, I guess. But I can only do it once.
Yeah.
So, given the time period, is it they simply killed everybody and then killed themselves because it was more of an honor thing?
I don't know. It's possible. It was 1879, this particular story. And she only killed herself. So, yeah, you do have to wonder.
Well, yeah, I also wonder about some of these cases, especially women, where is it that they simply know that there wouldn't be a future for them anywhere else?
Well, that's possible.
Because it's the West and it's pretty darn brutal.
Yeah.
As a lot of these stories were.
The late 1800s.
And you had another one I thought was funny, but it wasn't. It was on
Those are the best.
page 28, and it was called a real sense of comedy timing,
Oh, yeah.
which I thought was pretty interesting. Mrs. Samuel B. was giving birth at her home near Spearmore on December 16th, 1913. And, well, old boy, congratulations, said the doctor to Mr. B. And he said, what is it, a boy or girl? And the doctor said, twins. Mr. B dropped dead.
Oh no.
In one of my other books, there's a similar story about someone going into a shoe store in Paducah, Kentucky, and asking how much a new pair of shoes is, and then dropping dead when being told the price. It's dark, but it's kind of hard not to chuckle.
Oh, sure. But it was funny. I mean,
Because the timing is just so outrageously right.
yeah.
What are the odds?
Wow. Barbara?
Well, it's I'm looking through that chapter, and it's interesting from like the 1890s to say 1920. The suicide rate seems to be really high in these stories.
Well, the lynching rate too.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking the Wild West here. So many people got lynched. It's just amazing anyone was ever legally hanged at all.
Well, and it's interesting because if you look at some of the tombstones, say in Bodie or elsewhere, and they'll write that this person was hanged by mistake.
Yeah.
So even if they were lynched, it was just more like an unruly mob last-minute decision thing.
It definitely happened a lot. And one of the other things in the book that I wouldn't call it a theme exactly, but it just keeps coming back over and over, are these bizarre little coroner's jury verdicts. Somebody gets lynched, and then the coroner's jury, of course, they have to meet and make a decision. So they'll come up with something like died of emphysema at the end of a rope.
Yeah, I seen that too.
Another time they came to the decision of died of choking and a sudden change of altitude.
Oh, yeah.
Oh no.
And another time they lynched a horse thief, and they hanged him from a telegraph pole, and the official verdict was committed suicide by tying his rope to the end of the pole and then riding his horse out from under it. So you get this really bleak sense of humor on the frontier, and nowhere is it recorded better than in the coroner's jury verdicts.
Hey.
That's only 3. There are more than that.
And was it just out of a sense of macabre humor, or were they just simply trying to avoid calling it a mob lynching?
I think it's both. It shows the macabre humor, gallows humor, so to speak, but at the same time, a lot of the times they thought a horse thief deserved being hanged, and they weren't about to punish anyone for it. So they would call it a suicide.
Okay. And also to avoid the trial?
And to avoid a trial. Trials are expensive. That way they get rid of the scum of the desert, and they don't have to have the expense of a trial, and make a good joke, too.
That was probably true a lot in the gold rush era, too, where you had people claim jumping, for example.
Yeah, they did. They lynched a lot of claim jumpers.
Awesome.
And horse thieves. They
And
really
horses.
thought that was about the worst crime possible, was stealing a horse.
Oh yeah.
And cattle, yeah. And cattle, I assume. So
Cattle, yeah,
Oh
definitely.
yeah, rustling.
I've got a few stories about Lynch cattle rustlers and sheep herders, I think. The cattlemen and the sheep herders hated each other.
right. Because the sheep herders wanted to fence in areas, and the cattle guys didn't like that very much.
Yeah, there's just so much grass to go around, so there's a big fight over who gets to turn their livestock on the grass.
Ugh.
And you get
just-
you get
Well, that's why they had such problems with the rat.
what, Jeff?
Oh, for a moment I thought I may have muted myself. I was saying a lot of the old westerns was always about the sheep herders and the cow
Cattlemen.
farmer. Yeah, cattlemen, cowboys.
Yeah.
Because it's the way they eat grass. Because cows eat grass differently than sheep. Sheep will just lob it right up from the root.
Now, you had quite a few of them where when they would go to kill somebody, they would do it like 3 or 4 different times to the person instead of just one time to kill them. On page 35, That He Wasn't was the name of the thing that you had written on there. And in Helena, Oklahoma, July 22nd, 1912, young Mr. R, age 20, hit Mrs. Minnie R over the head with an iron pipe, then struck her with an axe, then cut her throat with a razor. Mr. R's first name was Meek.
That was the detail that I thought made it worth telling. Entirely inappropriate first name.
Yeah, he wasn't very meek. But you have quite a few of them where they do all kinds of different things to the body, and the first one probably was enough to kill him.
Yeah, you do see a lot of that. So I'm not sure if that's just impatience or somebody's hard to kill.
Well, if you hit them with something like that and they get back up, and you hit them with an axe,
Yeah.
and they still get back up, I wouldn't have worried about the next one. I'd have been gone.
I'd be thinking zombie at that point.
True. But also, it goes back to the mentality, I guess, of just how much pent up energy there must have been, how much pent up rage for some of these people.
I think so. I mean, if you're going to do that many things, you're pretty angry.
Yeah, pretty much. You had one in there, Community's Revenge, about a gentleman in a mining town, and he beat his wife in public, I guess, and so they were going to lynch him, but evidently they set him free so that they could force him to run a gauntlet of miners with black snake whips.
Yes. Yeah.
Ah.
And then they were going to lynch him, but interestingly enough, the women of the town said, no, just banish him. That's good enough. So they were less bloodthirsty than the men were.
But it goes back to the what was considered punishment back then, and was the West that lawless? You wonder where the marshals were. You wonder where the law enforcement happened.
I suppose a lot of the times they just didn't want to get the law involved. They wanted to get it done quick and fast without any trials or anything to get in the way. And they just felt that they could do it better on their own, which I guess is where, the whole idea behind lynching comes from in the first place.
Yeah.
They trust the law to do it and they're in a hurry, so they do it themselves.
Yeah. Are you aware of any stories of arrests of the Lynch Mob?
It did happen sometimes. Sometimes it happened. I don't know if I have any stories like that in the book. I might. Very often, though, the lynchers got off they would be tried and then they would be set free because everyone basically thought, well, we're just going through the motions here. But they did a good job. They got rid of a scoundrel in the community. We're not going to punish them for that.
Now, did you find did that type of behavior change with the amount of gambling that was happening within a specific area, or was it pretty much you cheated cards, you're going to get shot, so it kind of ended the story right there?
That's a good theory. I don't remember seeing anything that correlated strictly to gambling. Most of the time, if you were going to get lynched, it seemed to be for stealing a horse, stealing a cattle, or committing murder.
And everything else was kind of a gunfight?
Yeah, well, they did a lot of settling things on their own, definitely, especially out west.
Well, and can we make a correlation here between dueling and gunfights? Was that kind of the gentleman's honor system in both the East and the West Coast?
It seems to have been definitely true in the South. I've done a lot of stories on Southern dueling in some other books, but out west there was a lot of dueling as well.
And I guess that's probably what the gunfight pretty much is a duel. Who could outshoot the who? Yeah.
I think probably down south, though, they had a lot more rules about it. You had to take a certain number of paces, and the provoked person got to pick a weapon. You had a second with you. You had a doctor present. You'd take a certain number of steps, turn and fire, and if you missed, it was over. But out west, it just seems they just shot at each other. They didn't have any rules or anything.
Yeah, just whoever drew their gun first and was
whoever
a good
was
shot.
quickest was the winner, and that's that.
Yeah. Which.
Yeah, but there doesn't seem to be any. What should I say? The effect for the winner of it. He was pretty much. You won the gunfight. Okay.
Yeah,
you live. That's your prize.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you win the gunfight, then you're the winner.
Yeah.
It's like winning a fist fight, I guess. People looked up to you.
And I don't think the actual gunfight was as much like what it was on TV. I don't think they had quick draws. They just had a gun and you pulled the gun and fired.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And if you could get the drop on somebody, ambush somebody, so much the better.
As long as you don't get caught doing that.
in the movies, you always see the two guys walking at each other up the lane, up the street. Everyone's ducking for cover, and then they just stop and they just shoot at each other. High noon gunfight on Main Street. I've never really seen a case of that actually happening. That seems to be a totally Hollywood thing.
I think so. I mean, they got to have it like that to interest the moviegoers.
It's more dramatic that way, but evidently most of the time they just shot you right there on the spot. Or they hid behind a tree or something and shot at you.
Well, it's like, and of course movies always over dramatize stuff. When they had the movie of the gunfight of the OK Corral, there's this massive shootout that goes all over the place. And in real life, it was just like they stood there, they drew their guns, they fired, people fell down.
Yeah, I think it was over in 30 seconds or something.
Yeah.
In the movies, they'll drag it out to 5 or 10 minutes.
Exactly.
It's just more dramatic that way.
Yeah, and the area that they actually fought in was a very, very small area.
Yeah, they were like in a back alley somewhere.
Yeah, it was an alley,
town.
I think. Not even a corral, just an alley near a corral.
Right.
There goes another,
Yep.
Well, a gunfight in the alley doesn't sound as good.
Well, apparently they do recreations of it in Tombstone. I did not know about that when my then girlfriend and I were in Tombstone, or we would have like, where do they do that? But we didn't know about it. But yeah, I saw it on one of the history programs about the Old West, and they're like, "This is what it was." But I'm like, well, that was anticlimactic.
Yeah, you could make a good movie out of that.
And it's not like the guns were that accurate either.
No.
So, you probably had a mess and I think it was mess. I think I don't remember how many rounds they shot, but very few of them actually reached the mark. Otherwise, all of them would have been dead, I would think. So maybe that's why gunfights were probably not as prevalent in your stories as it was with other objects being used to kill.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
And back early in the Western days, all they had was the ball and cap pistols and powder. I mean, you had a 6-shot pistol, but you had to put powder in it, you had to put a ball in it and cramp it down, and you had to put a cap on the cylinder in order to fire it. So you didn't reload them very fast.
I think you're thinking more revolutionary times than the Old West.
No.
The Old
I had an 1876
literal
black
bullets.
powder pistol, and that's the way you had to load it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You would not have done well in a gunfight. I don't.
Oh, you think so?
Well, because most people had bullet encased bullets. They didn't need to do the
Well,
old,
that
old
and
time to
bullets
reload the powder.
were rare.
Yeah.
Extremely rare, and that's where the term a shot of whiskey comes from. Is you could pay by bullets, so a shot of whiskey was literally a pay for a bullet for the whiskey.
I did not know that.
By the Wild West era, there was kind of a variety of weapons, and there were some guns where you could just immediately load them with bullets and start firing, but then there were others that required powder, like you say.
Yeah, the ones with bullets didn't come till, about the 1860s, a little past 1860, because a lot of your Civil War guns had the ball and cap pistols.
Yeah.
But it wasn't long after that. I'm sure that they come out with cartridge bullets during the Civil War, but it wasn't till a few years into the Civil War. So, go ahead, Barbara.
No, wasn't going to say anything.
Oh, I thought you was.
Well, the Western era also goes back to at least the 1840s or so.
Oh, yeah.
When they really were using powder most of the time to load guns. And through much of the 1850s, too, I think. One thing I've learned from reading all the old newspapers is a lot of the times the powder-loaded weapons would actually set your clothes on fire.
Oops.
You'd shoot someone and the powder would ignite and set their clothes on fire. So they'd have a bullet in their head and they'd be on fire. You don't see that in the movies much, but
Well, I'm sure if you was close enough to them, because the flame shoots out pretty good distance when you shoot a ball cap. So if you was pretty close to them, it could probably set somebody's clothes on fire.
well, I've also read accounts of suicides, for example, who'd shoot at point blank range and they'd set their clothes on fire too.
Uh-huh.
Oops.
So they would be shot and on fire at the same time.
Yeah.
And hysterical.
And
There's an
the person shooting them would be on fire.
Probably.
I think the person shooting was probably okay.
Oh, goodness.
Well, I've seen recreations in movies and such where they've had the powder gun, and the explosion is so much it'll knock you right on your backside, as well as sometimes singe your hair and eyebrows and stuff.
Oh, okay. I guess it was dangerous for the shooter and the person getting shot.
Oh yeah.
I got a question in the chat room. Wants to know, was there any stoning deaths in the West?
Not as far as I know. I'm sure it happened. Somebody gets mad and they just throw a rock at somebody, but I can't think of any official, everybody in town gets a rock and goes after somebody.
Well, the Indians could have did something like that if they wanted to.
They probably did, yeah.
Of course, the person would probably be tied up when they'd be doing it.
Yeah. I'm not aware of any particular cases, but it seems like such a sort of an obvious way to kill somebody. I'm sure somebody did it.
Well, on page 47, you had one called Encore. And I thought it was a pretty interesting one. Somebody was pretty tough.
I don't even remember that one. Let me see. Oh, here we are. I've just got a terrible memory.
Don't feel bad.
Oh, yeah, look at this guy. And that was a fairly recent one, if you call 1934 recent. But
Right.
South Dakota farm laborer cut his throat from ear to ear and then swallowed the knife. So, again, you wonder, wasn't cutting your throat ear to ear good enough? Why would you swallow the knife, too?
Well,
Who were you trying to impress there?
Well, he could have been trying to hide the evidence to blame it on somebody else, maybe.
Oh, that may be.
Yeah. But it didn't say anything, I guess, in the rest of it. He said he expired the next day, so.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a long bleed out.
Makes my stomach hurt just thinking about it.
I mean, slice your own throat and then try to swallow the knife to hide it, so. Yeah.
And it's the weirdest sideshow audition ever.
But there was another really a unique one to my about a murder that took place of a gentleman in Pueblo, Colorado, where the coroner and the doctor examined the body and thought he died of diphtheria and buried him. But then he was exhumed and went back east, and they re-examined him and found that there was a bullet hole in the back of his head.
Oops.
And the murderer had put a cork or a seal.
Had carved a piece of wood.
Yeah.
And put it in so well, so snugly that nobody noticed.
Huh.
Wow.
So what caused him to go back and actually look at it again?
His friends wanted to have him exhumed and buried out east where he came from. And I guess they just wanted to take another look, and they found the little wooden plug in the back of his head.
So did they actually catch the culprit then?
I don't know if they did. A lot of the times when you're looking at the old newspapers, one problem is they'll tell you this really neat fact, and then there's no follow-up stories.
Huh.
And then you have no idea what happened next.
Wow.
That was one of those cases.
Yeah. We're looking at a time when it would have been not pick up a phone and call somebody back west. It would have been telegraph if it got there. Yeah. So who knows if this person ever got caught. But that's ingenious. But I guess it goes back to just how ineffective or weak some of these guns that they were using on. Because today that would have been very obvious that there had been a bullet hole.
Yeah, you do have to wonder how in the world how they missed that.
Yeah. Not a very good coroner, obviously. Or maybe it makes you kind of wonder back then some of the deaths that happened. And like you were saying with the coroner's office, where they were coming up with these really flowery reasons for death, as to how much of it was really true or not. Or did they just gloss over so many deaths because they just simply didn't want to be bothered?
Oh, I'm sure that happened a lot, too. Especially if the person who died was a stranger coming through town, they probably felt, why go through all the extra work? It's not even a local person. No one's going to know.
No,
there was probably a lot of that, too.
Yeah.
And how many of those strangers were actually robbed in the meantime?
I would guess quite a few.
Well, probably a lot of them didn't have anything to rob, though.
I don't know. At this time, it would have been people coming west for either logging or
mining?
gold, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, mining. Mm-hmm. or looking for a job in a mine going out west.
It's just amazing. I'm sure we'll never know how many people simply disappeared on their way out there, or were murdered and were assumed to be transients or hobos or something. Quickly was buried and quickly got buried, and nobody thought anything more of it.
So out of all of these, I assume that most of them were buried in a cemetery or a burial ground like that. But I'm sure probably in the cases, if they found a cattle rustler, they wouldn't have taken the time to take him into town. They would have done it right there and buried the body, right?
I would say so. I've heard of cases, too, where they just simply leave the body up in the tree and let someone else worry about it.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's not like it's going anywhere.
Yeah, true.
Exactly. Trying to make an example out of him.
Yeah. Could have been nasty looking.
Yeah, you had one on page 47 called "You're a Bad Man, Charlie Brown."
Another cartoon reference. I like to hide little pop culture references here and there to see if people will find them.
I thought that one was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and the guy was actually named Charles Brown, which makes it even better. See, that was out in South Dakota. He got fired from his job. He worked in a restaurant. I don't now remember if he was a waiter or a cook. But a couple of days later, he went back to the restaurant to try to steal some money, and he got caught, and he killed the proprietor's wife, and he killed a dog and left their bodies in the storeroom. And he was caught. Everyone knew that he did it. His defense attorneys almost laughed it out of court because they had absolutely nothing to say in his defense. And he ended up getting hanged, legally, I should add. But what made it interesting was the murder victim's husband said, "Can I be the hangman?" And they agreed to let him do it.
Wow. And by that,
See, that was
you simply
in
mean pull the lever, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
They let him pull the gallows trap. So
Yeah.
that was in Deadwood in
Yeah.
1897.
It was pretty interesting.
Deadwood's a really interesting town
I'd like to go there.
And TV series.
and TV series. And that's Mount Moriah Cemetery, I believe, is there.
I think so.
Which I can't remember who's buried there, but there's a couple of
I believe it
well-known
was
gunslingers.
Wild Bill
Wild
Hickok.
Bill Hickok?
Yeah,
Hickok. Yeah.
because he got killed in the bar holding aces and eights. Yeah, and it's called the Dead Man's Hand.
Yeah, I wouldn't know that either. Two stories really struck me, and well, a lot of them did. As far as these sort of like serial killers and mass killers were happening, and one of them was the Denver Strangler.
That was such a weird story. That's another one where I really would like to know more about it, but there just really wasn't very much. But he was one of the earliest serial killers, I guess, in America. And he strangled prostitutes over the course of a few years. Strangled them with towels, as I recall.
Yeah.
And was never caught, never identified. The part that I thought made it extra super creepy, in fact, I think I called it an X-Files quality detail, is at one point during his series of crimes, the fortune teller said, "The ghosts know who it is, and they're going to give me his identity." And something like the very next day, she was found strangled with a towel. So a lot of people thought, well, apparently the serial killer believed in ghosts, and he killed her before she could tell.
And that was 1884 to 1889, so that would have been about the time of Ripper, right?
Yeah, just exactly. That would have been 1888 for Jack the Ripper. I think his last, not the Ripper, but the Denver Strangler, I think his last possible crime was 1902, something like that.
Wow.
But I'm just going by my memory.
Yeah, it's interesting that, you know, even continental Europe seemed to transfer over. And you can't call it a copycat crime, obviously, but it seemed to have a lot of the qualities. Although he didn't dissect them, I don't think.
No, I think he just strangled them and went on his way.
Just that they were prostitutes and psychic.
Yeah, and in the same street, if I remember correctly.
Oh, yeah.
Which made it even more likely in person.
Yeah. So that would have been like a street with a lot of brothels, I assume.
Yeah, I think so. One was Japanese, which I thought was sort of interesting, and one was French.
Wow. And the other one happened in Washington, right?
Let's see, serial killing in Washington.
I think it was more of a, it's called Crashing the Party.
Oh, the mass murder.
Yeah.
That
Not
should be more famous than it. Not really a serial killer, but just someone who killed a whole bunch of people at once. I'm trying to find that one to get the details. I know it was a Fleeter. I guess it's pronounced Fleeter. Or Flighter. Fleeter, probably. Give me a moment, I'll find it.
133, but I'm on a Kindle, so I don't know if it's the same page numbers.
What was the name of it?
Oh, here it is. I found it. The title was Crashing the Party. It was Orlando Point, Bremerton, Washington. There we are. That one's sort of hard to capsulize. A couple guys noticed poodles in a car, and the poodles remained in the car for 2 or 3 days, and finally someone said, well, something's going on, we better check this out. And they peeped in the window of the Fleeter house and saw a couple bodies and a lot of overturned furniture. So they called the cops. When the cops came in, they found not just 2 bodies, but 6. And they'd all been beaten, shot, slashed, stabbed, tied up, taped.
Somebody just couldn't make up their minds.
Yeah, it reminded me of the Manson murders, actually, because they were overkilled in so many gruesome ways, and their bodies were left ranged all around the house. One was stuffed in a closet, for example. And it went unsolved for a couple years. And then finally they figured out who did it. He was hanged legally. By the 1930s, there wasn't very much lynching. There was a little bit out west, but by that point, it was mostly legal hangings. He had a female companion, and they let her go. She convinced them that she really had nothing to do with it.
Wow. So yeah, I assume that things sort of started calming down in the 1900s. At least, I would assume once we got past the pandemic, the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
That things started to, well, I think it probably killed off a lot of people too, but things started slowing down a bit.
Yeah, by the time you get to the 1930s or so, there are more legal hangings than lynchings.
Well, also the population goes up, and probably also law enforcement started to get a little bit more organized.
Yeah. Better law enforcement, more police, better organization, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
And you also had better communication, too.
Sure.
Yeah. Better communication.
Yeah.
And probably not as the court systems probably were a little bit more together. I mean, in the early days, judges traveled from place to place, right?
Yeah, circuit riders. Sort of a different change in attitude too, I think.
Well, I know by the 1900s, the pirates were out of San Francisco and probably Washington too, Seattle.
Oh.
I think there were several pirates, Shanghais, for lack of a better term. Although I don't know if you got into Shanghais in your stories or not.
No, I haven't had anything about the Barbary pirates, I think, Barbary Coast. I've never really written about them. So much has already been done, I just don't think I could add anything to it.
There's a lot out there on it, yeah. A lot of disappearing people that way, too, but I think it was limited to the ports.
Yeah, I think San Francisco especially.
Yeah, there's a lot of Shanghai tunnels.
Yeah.
And in Seattle as well. So
Yes. Seattle and San Francisco is big at that.
yeah.
All right. It's about time for us to take a quick break. I just want to let you know, Kevin, that you won't hear anything till I come back on the air. But your mic will be live, so don't say anything. And
Okay.
we'll
Or
be
mute
out.
the mic.
Yeah, we'll be out.
I'll refrain from singing.
It'll be about 5-6 minutes, something like that, and you'll hear me talking when we come back on. So,
All right.
With that,
Okay.
which one you guys take us out, Jeff?
Yep.
Or Barbara? Somebody.
Yep. No, so it's me.
Okay.
You're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with your hosts Henry Foister, Ceiling Cat Barbara Duncan, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with tonight's guest, returning author Keven McQueen. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.